I'm about that action, boss. You ever heard that phrase? I'm about that action, boss. If you haven't, it comes from this guy named Marshawn Lynch, who's an NFL running back. Absolute stud, really, really yoked homie, right? Really good at football. And it comes from this guy saying it at a certain press conference during a certain Super Bowl, actually. Because Marshawn Lynch is notorious for how much that he dislikes, or pretty well hates press conferences. And during almost all of his press conferences that he's ever been a part of, he says minimal to almost no words, right? And this is typically, it's very normal of him. This is very and it's typically not a big deal. The only problem is Marshawn Lynch and his team make it to the Super Bowl. And the only problem with that is Marshawn Lynch has to go through an entire week of nothing but, you guessed it, press conferences. And so, during this week of press conferences, he does his normal, nonchalant, 1 or 2 word answers, if not answering anything at all. And by near the end of the week, they finally get to this point, and one guy just has the guts to ask, Marshawn, why do you hate press conferences so much? And his response is incredible. He simply just turns and looks at him and says, I'm about that action, boss, and doesn't say another word, right? And that's such a good phrase, I'm about that action, boss, because to begin to explain a little bit of context given to James chapter 2. Because James has been writing to a people who have honestly, they've been about that action. They've been doing things right, or so they think. But the only problem is that the action that they're doing, it's just the wrong kind of action. In James chapter 2, you read in verse 10, it says, For the person who keeps all the laws except one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. For the same God who said, You must not commit adultery, also said, You must not murder. So if you murder someone but do not commit adultery, you have still broken the law. So whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. See, because the people that James is writing to, he's writing to the people that are following an old covenant. They're following an old law, right? And these people, these Jewish Christians actually, they're following a whole bunch of rules and regulations. And they're like, dude, we're doing it right. Only problem is, while following these rules and regulations, they're not actually loving people or living like Jesus much at all. And this is a problem. And this is what James writes these people to begin to address, because this old covenant and old law was ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. And so these Jewish believers are struggling with this idea of, we don't have to follow these old rules anymore. We only have to follow one man, right? Because there's so many rules and so many regulations and so many laws in specifically the Old Testament that were all fulfilled in Jesus. And these believers are struggling through this, they're trying to work through this, because this new covenant, new law simply is the reality of Jesus. He came, he died, he resurrected and ascended, and now we have his Holy Spirit, and that is the new law, right? And we're supposed to begin to live into that. And so, because again, they're following these rules, these regulations, and these laws, but they're not loving people like Jesus. And James challenged them to be about that action, so to speak. Be about the action of loving and living like Jesus. And this is such a call for us as believers today. Because verse 14 is pretty well the biggest problem we can face in junior high, high school, and sometimes even in life in general. We see in verse 14 it says, What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? By a raise of hands, even if you're just watching the video, but if we're being honest with ourselves, how often does that verse maybe relate to us? I've had so many conversations with people in especially junior hires and high schoolers across the country, honestly, of them saying a certain phrase that typically goes like this. Yes, I believe in Jesus, but I'm not where I should be. I don't follow him as close as I know I ought. Something along those lines. Right? And verse 14 is talking specifically about that. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it with your actions? Jake had a really great Billy Graham quote yesterday and it said this specifically. If there's no evidence of change in your life, then you better check whether or not you're actually really even a Christian. See, because this whole fundamental thing of our idea that we struggle with is something that we really need to begin to address. Yes, we believe, but we need to act like that as well. Because in verses 19 and 20, James also addresses more deeply this idea. 19, you say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. And he says, good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? See, because your relationship with Jesus is more than just believing in him, right? It's more, it's about following him through that belief. And what I mean by that is this: your actions should match what you believe. If you believe Jesus to be loving, you should be loving. If you believe Jesus to be gracious, you should be gracious. And this is more than just being nice to the token loner kid in your grade, or someone that like maybe we know that just doesn't have a lot of friends. This is more than just that. Do you love people well? Do you notice others? Do you not gossip behind your friends' backs about stuff that maybe frustrates you? Do you forgive easily without holding grudges? Do you consider people better than yourself? Could people say about you that you are genuinely kind and loving to others? Because verse 22 and 24 ends this thought so well. Verse 22, you see, his faith and his actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. Verse 24, so you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not just by faith alone. And this reality of trying to live through that and trying to work through this idea of, yes, I believe, but my actions are struggling to match that. That's something that, again, only the Holy Spirit can begin to help us with. And Jake's call to have us to begin to, wake up and even still yet pray the prayer of, Jesus, I trust that you're pursuing me before you ever touch your phone, is such a good encouragement, because the only way that we can be loving to others, that we can notice others, that we can not gossip behind other people's backs, that we can think of people better than ourselves or not hold grudges and forgive others well, is only by spending time with Jesus. That's the only way that's going to happen. Because when we spend time with him, we begin to follow him and then begin to look like him. And that's that action that Jesus is about.